I was 16 years old, and my brother Danny was 12 when we stood in the parking lot of Riverside Children's Home, waiting for someone we'd never met to pick us up. We'd been in the system for 8 years, ever since our parents died in a house fire that we barely escaped. I still had the scars on my left arm to prove it. We'd bounced through 4 different foster homes together, always moved as a pair, because I'd made it clear from the beginning that separating us wasn't an option. Some families couldn't handle 2 traumatized kids, others just wanted the stipend, and one particularly bad placement ended when I threatened to run away with Danny if they didn't send us back. By the time we were teenagers, the system had basically given up on placing us permanently. We'd settled into Riverside, a sprawling facility that housed 37 kids of various ages. It wasn't home, but it was stable, and Danny had made friends there. I'd been planning our exit strategy for when I turned 18, researching emancipation laws and job prospects, trying to figure out how I could keep us together once I aged out. Then, 3 weeks ago, a social worker named Patricia Chen called us into her office with news that changed everything. "Your grandfather wants to take custody of both of you," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. I'd stared at her in disbelief. "We don't have a grandfather," I told her. "Our dad's parents died before we were born, and our mum's father, we thought he was dead too." "Apparently not," Patricia said gently. "His name is William Brooks. He's 73 years old, and he lives on a farm in rural Pennsylvania. He reached out to us 2 months ago, requesting custody. We've been processing the paperwork and doing background checks. Everything cleared, so if you boys are willing, you can go live with him." Danny had looked at me with those huge brown eyes that still looked too young for all the sadness they held. "Do we have to?" he whispered. He'd been through enough changes, enough disruptions. The idea of uprooting again terrified him. But Patricia explained that our grandfather was family, that the state preferred family placement over institutional care, and that if we refused, we'd just stay at Riverside until I turned 18 anyway. Then Danny would likely be placed elsewhere, since I wouldn't be able to take him immediately. I'd asked the obvious question: why now? Where has he been for 8 years? Patricia had consulted her notes. According to his statement, he and your mother were estranged. He didn't know about the fire until recently when he hired someone to locate her. He's been trying to make contact for the past year, and when he learned she'd passed and you boys were in the system, he immediately started the custody process. It didn't feel right. A grandfather who suddenly appears after nearly a decade of absence, who hadn't been there when we needed him most. But I also knew our options were limited. At least on a farm in Pennsylvania we'd be together. I could finish high school, maybe find work nearby, and Danny would have stability. It had to be better than bouncing between group homes and foster families who looked at us like problems to manage, rather than kids who needed help. So we'd agreed, and now here we stood with our belongings packed into 3 worn duffel bags, waiting for a stranger who shared our blood, but not our history. The car that pulled up was an old pickup truck, forest green with patches of rust along the wheel wells. The man who stepped out moved slowly, like his joints hurt, but he was tall and broad-shouldered despite his age. He had thick white hair, a weathered face carved with deep lines, and eyes that were the exact same shade of hazel as Danny's. "William Brooks," he said simply, extending a calloused hand to me. "You must be Marcus. And this is Daniel." "Danny," my brother corrected quietly, hanging back slightly behind me. "Danny," William repeated, nodding. "I understand if you boys are nervous. This is a strange situation for all of us." His voice was gruff but not unkind, and there was something in his expression, a sort of restrained emotion that suggested this moment meant more to him than he was letting on. We loaded our bags into the truck bed, and Danny climbed into the back seat while I took the passenger side up front. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I watched Riverside disappear in the side mirror, feeling a complicated mix of relief and anxiety. The drive to Pennsylvania took almost 4 hours. William wasn't much of a talker, but he answered our questions in his brief, direct way. Yes, the farm had been in the family for generations. No, He didn't have any other family besides us. Yes, there was enough room for both of us. The land was mostly wooded, with about 30 acres cleared for hay and pasture, plus a large vegetable garden. He raised chickens and had 2 horses, though he was getting too old for the heavy work and mostly just kept the place maintained. "Your mother grew up there," he said at one point, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "She loved that farm more than anything when she was young. Used to spend hours in the barn with the animals or down by the creek catching tadpoles." I wanted to ask why they'd been estranged. What had driven them apart so completely that he hadn't been in our lives at all? But something about the rigid set of his shoulders and the way his jaw clenched told me this wasn't the time. Danny had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the stress and early morning departure. I watched the landscape change outside my window, urban sprawl giving way to suburbs, then to rural farmland and forests. The world felt bigger out here, less contained than the city neighborhoods I'd grown up in. We turned off the highway onto smaller roads, then onto a gravel drive marked by a simple wooden sign that read Brooks Farm. The property opened up before us, a white 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a huge red barn that looked like it had been recently painted, and several smaller outbuildings scattered across the cleared land. Behind everything, dense forest rose up, creating a natural boundary that made the farm feel isolated and protected. "It's not fancy," William said as he parked near the house, "but it's solid, and there's plenty of space. I figured you boys could each have your own room upstairs. The bathroom's been updated, and the heating works well enough, though we'll need to keep the wood stove going come winter." Danny woke up as we parked, rubbing his eyes and looking around with confused apprehension. William helped us carry our bags inside, and I had to admit the farmhouse was more comfortable than I'd expected. The interior was clean and simply furnished, with worn hardwood floors and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The kitchen was spacious, with a massive wooden table that could easily seat 8 people, and the living room had a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Upstairs, William showed us to 2 bedrooms at the front of the house, both overlooking the driveway and fields beyond. They were basic but adequate, each with a bed, dresser and desk. There was a 3rd bedroom at the end of the hall that William used, and a surprisingly modern bathroom with updated fixtures that looked out of place in the otherwise rustic house. "I updated it 5 years ago," William explained when he caught me looking. "Figured if I was going to get old on this farm, I at least wanted a decent shower and proper water pressure." That first week was awkward, as we all tried to figure out how to exist in the same space. William was clearly uncomfortable with the sudden presence of 2 teenagers in his quiet, ordered life. He'd set routines that we disrupted simply by being there. Meals were silent affairs, where he served simple but substantial food, scrambled eggs and bacon for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, meat and vegetables for dinner, always cooked competently but without any flair or creativity. He showed us around the property, explaining the daily tasks that needed doing, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, mucking out the horse stalls, maintaining the garden, splitting firewood for the coming winter. It was more physical work than either of us was used to, and that first week left both Danny and me exhausted and sore. But there was something honest about the labor, something straightforward that I appreciated after years of navigating the complicated social dynamics of institutional care. Danny struggled more than I did with the adjustment. He missed his friends from Riverside, missed the structured activities and the constant presence of other kids. The farm was quiet in a way that seemed to amplify his loneliness. He'd spend hours in his room reading or drawing, only emerging for meals and chores. I could see him withdrawing into himself, and it worried me. William noticed too. One evening, after Danny had gone to bed early, William brought 2 mugs of coffee out to the porch where I was sitting and handed me one. "He's having a hard time," William said, settling into the rocking chair beside me. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I admitted. "It's a big change. Quiet out here compared to what we're used to." William nodded slowly, staring out at the darkening fields. Your mother went through something similar when she was about his age, hated the isolation, felt trapped by all this empty space, wanted excitement, city life, people and noise and constant stimulation. It was the first time he'd voluntarily mentioned our mother, and I seized the opportunity. What happened between you two? Why weren't you in our lives? His jaw worked for a moment, and I thought he might shut down the conversation. But then he sighed heavily, his shoulders sagging. Pride, mostly. Stubbornness on both sides. Your mother wanted to leave the farm, go to college, build a different kind of life. I thought she was making a mistake, told her she was abandoning her heritage and responsibilities. We said things we shouldn't have, and neither of us was willing to apologize or compromise. By the time I realized what a fool I'd been, she'd married your father and moved 3 states away. I tried to reach out once, but she sent my letter back unopened. After that, my pride took over again. I figured if she didn't want me in her life, I wouldn't force myself on her. He took a long drink of his coffee. Biggest regret of my life. I let stubbornness cost me my daughter and years with you boys. When I finally got over myself and hired someone to find her, learning she was gone, it felt like punishment for my pride. But then I found out about you two, and I thought maybe I could do right by you the way I failed to do right by her. I sat with that for a while, processing this glimpse into the family history we'd never known. It didn't excuse his absence, but it made him more human, more understandable. We're all just people making mistakes and trying to live with the consequences. The school situation got sorted out the following week. William drove us into town, a small community called Millbrook, about 20 minutes from the farm, to register at the local high school and middle school. I'd be starting 11th grade. Danny would be in 7th. The schools were tiny compared to what we were used to. My entire grade had maybe 60 students, but the teachers seemed competent and the other kids were friendly, in that cautious way rural teenagers are with obvious outsiders. Danny had an easier time at his school, quickly making friends with a boy named Tyler who lived on a neighboring farm and shared his interest in comics and fantasy novels. I watched him slowly come out of his shell, saw him smile more frequently, heard him laugh at dinner when he told us about something funny that happened at school. It was a relief to see him adjusting, finding his place in this strange new life we'd been thrust into. I fell into my own routine, school during the day, farm work in the evenings, homework at night. William had a small library of books in the den, mostly practical manuals about farming and animal husbandry, but also some classic literature and history books. I started reading more than I ever had before, partly because there wasn't much else to do in the evenings, but also because the quiet gave me space to think without the constant noise and drama of group home life. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 weeks after we'd arrived, William asked us to help him with a project in the barn. We'd been in the barn plenty of times for daily chores, but he led us to the back corner where a heavy wooden door was secured with a substantial padlock. "I need to get something from the basement," he said, pulling a key from his pocket. "Figured it's time you boys knew what's down there." Neither Danny nor I had known there was a basement under the barn. William unlocked the padlock and pulled the door open, revealing steep wooden stairs descending into darkness. He flicked a switch, and lights came on below, illuminating a space that made both of us freeze in shock. If you're finding yourself drawn into Marcus and Danny's story and wondering what secrets their grandfather has been keeping in that barn basement, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about unexpected discoveries and the complicated relationships that shape us, and I post new stories every week. I'm really curious, have you ever discovered something about a family member that completely changed how you understood them? Maybe you found old letters, photos, or objects that revealed a side of them you never knew existed. Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one, and this community loves hearing how the past has a way of surprising us and reshaping our understanding of the people we thought we knew. The basement wasn't what either of us expected. Instead of dusty storage or farm equipment, we found ourselves looking at what could only be described as a professional workshop. The space was large, probably 40 feet by 30 feet, with concrete floors and walls lined with pegboards holding tools I'd never seen before. There were several workbenches, each organized with meticulous precision, and industrial shelving units loaded with supplies, metal sheets, wires, electronic components, circuit boards, and dozens of plastic bins labeled with technical terms I didn't recognize. But what dominated the space were the machines. 3 large pieces of equipment sat in the center of the room, clearly the focus of the entire setup. They looked like something between factory machinery and scientific instruments, with metal frames, complex mechanical assemblies, and control panels covered in switches, dials, and small screens. Cables ran between them and to several computers on a desk against the far wall. "What is all this?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the concrete space. William descended the stairs slowly, a complex expression on his face that mixed pride, sadness, and something that looked like relief. "This is what I did before I retired," he said. "I was an aerospace engineer. Worked for a defense contractor for 37 years, specialized in propulsion systems and mechanical design. When I retired, I couldn't just stop, so I set up this workshop to continue my own projects." Danny had moved closer to one of the machines, studying it with fascinated eyes. "What does it do?" "It's a precision milling machine," William explained, walking over to stand beside him. "It can cut and shape metal to incredibly exact specifications, down to thousandths of an inch. This one over here is a lathe for turning cylindrical parts, and that's a drill press with a computer-controlled positioning system I built myself." I stared at him, recalibrating everything I thought I knew about this quiet farmer who'd spent the last 6 weeks teaching us how to feed chickens and split firewood. "You're an engineer?" "A retired one," he said with a slight shrug. "But yes, I spent most of my career designing components for aircraft and missiles, working on projects I still can't talk about because of security clearances. Your mother hated it, actually. She thought the work was too connected to military applications, too much about destruction instead of creation. It was one of the things we argued about." He moved to the workbench and picked up a small metal object, turning it over in his calloused hands. "After she left and your grandmother passed away, the work was all I had. I'd come down here every evening and weekend, designing things, building prototypes, solving engineering problems just for the challenge of it. The farm was my cover, I suppose, a way to appear normal and simple when really my mind was always down here, thinking about tolerances and stress calculations and mechanical advantage." "Why are you showing us this?" I asked. The question came out more suspicious than I'd intended, but I couldn't help wondering about his motives. He'd kept this secret for weeks. Why reveal it now? William set down the metal piece and looked at both of us directly. "Because I realized I was making the same mistake I made with your mother. I was hiding a fundamental part of who I am because I was afraid you wouldn't understand or wouldn't approve. Your mother thought my work was cold and calculating, that someone who spent their life designing weapon systems couldn't possibly be a good person. Maybe she was right, or maybe she just couldn't see past the applications to the pure problem-solving aspects that fascinated me. Either way, I let that criticism drive a wedge between us, and I won't make that mistake again." He gestured around the basement workshop. "This is part of who I am. Not the whole of it, but an important part. I raise chickens and grow vegetables, but I also design mechanical systems and solve complex engineering challenges. Both things are true. I wanted you boys to know that, to understand that people are more complicated than they first appear." Over the next few weeks, the basement workshop became a bridge between us and William. He started teaching us about his work, not the classified military applications, but the fundamental principles of engineering, mechanical advantage, materials science, precision manufacturing. Danny took to it immediately, his natural curiosity and aptitude for math making him an eager student. He'd spend hours after school down in the basement, asking William questions and watching him work on various projects. I was more cautious initially, but gradually I found myself drawn to the methodical problem-solving aspects of engineering. There was something satisfying about understanding how things worked, about taking abstract concepts and turning them into physical objects with measurable properties and predictable behaviors. William had a teaching style that worked for me, patient but not condescending, willing to let us make mistakes and figure things out ourselves while providing guidance when we got truly stuck. He also started telling us stories about his career, carefully edited to avoid classified information, but full of interesting problems he'd solved and innovations he'd developed. He'd worked on satellite deployment mechanisms, landing gear systems for experimental aircraft, and control surfaces that could withstand extreme temperatures and stresses. His work had literally helped put objects into space and enabled aircraft to fly faster and higher than previous generations thought possible. One evening, about 3 months after we'd arrived at the farm, William showed us a project he'd been working on for the past 2 years. It was a mechanical device about the size of a shoebox, made of precisely machined aluminum parts that fit together with almost no visible gaps. The surface was covered in intricate patterns of holes and channels, and when William activated it with a small motor, the entire assembly began to move in a complex, mesmerizing way, different sections rotating and translating in what looked like random patterns, but was actually carefully choreographed. "It's a kinetic sculpture," William explained. "Serves no practical purpose whatsoever, except to be beautiful and interesting. I started building it after I retired because I wanted to create something that wasn't about utility or military application, just pure mechanical art." Danny watched the sculpture move, his eyes tracking the complex motion. "It's amazing," he said softly, "like watching thoughts become physical." William smiled, a genuine expression of pleasure that I'd rarely seen on his typically stoic face. "That's exactly what it is. Engineering isn't just about solving practical problems. It's about understanding the physical world so deeply that you can bend it to your will, make it do things that seem impossible. Your mother never understood that part. She saw the weapon's applications and stopped looking deeper." He turned to both of us, his expression serious. "I'm not trying to excuse the military work I did. Some of the things I designed were used in ways I'm not proud of. But I also helped develop safety systems that saved pilots' lives and satellite technology that enables communication and weather prediction. The world is complicated, and we rarely get to choose pure good or pure evil. Mostly we make choices in the grey areas and live with the consequences." As winter settled over the Pennsylvania farm, our lives fell into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. School, chores, homework, and increasingly time in the basement workshop learning from William. Danny had started designing his own small projects, simple mechanisms at first, a gear train that changed rotational speed, a linkage system that converted rotary motion to linear motion. But William encouraged him to think bigger, to push the boundaries of what he thought possible. I focused more on the practical applications, helping William maintain the farm equipment and learning how to diagnose and repair mechanical problems. The old tractor had become my project, a 1970s John Deere that ran but needed constant adjustment and maintenance. William taught me how to read technical diagrams, how to measure tolerances, how to understand why something failed and what needed to change to prevent future failures. It was deeply satisfying work that engaged my mind in ways school never had. But there was something else in that basement, something William hadn't shown us yet. I'd noticed another locked door at the far end of the workshop, heavy steel with a combination lock instead of a key. Occasionally, I'd catch William glancing at it with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between longing and apprehension. Danny had noticed it too, but when he'd asked about it, William had simply said that some projects weren't ready to be shared yet. Then one evening in early February, William called both of us down to the workshop after dinner. His manner was different, more serious and formal than usual. He'd set up 3 chairs facing the locked steel door, and he waited until we were both seated before he spoke. "What I'm about to show you is something I've never shared with anyone," he began. Not your grandmother, not colleagues, not even your mother. It's the project I've been working on since I retired. The thing that's consumed most of my creative energy for the past 11 years. He paused, studying both of our faces. Before I open this door, I need you to understand something. What's behind it represents years of work and resources, but more importantly, it represents a choice I made about how to use my knowledge and skills. Your mother would have hated it, probably would have seen it as proof that I valued machines over people. Maybe she would have been right, but I need you to see it before you judge, to understand what I was trying to accomplish. The drama of the build-up was making me nervous, and I could see Danny fidgeting in his chair. William walked to the steel door and worked the combination lock, his fingers moving with practiced precision. The lock clicked open and he pulled the heavy door wide, reaching inside to turn on additional lights. What we saw took my breath away. The room beyond was smaller than the main workshop, maybe 15 feet by 20 feet, but it was dominated by a single incredible object. At first glance, it looked like a small aircraft, but the design was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It had a sleek, streamlined body made of some lightweight composite material that gleamed under the lights, with stubby wings that seemed too small for flight and a tail section that incorporated design elements I couldn't begin to understand. But the most striking feature was the propulsion system visible through transparent panels on the sides. Instead of a traditional propeller or jet engine, there was a complex arrangement of rotating discs, magnetic coils, and what looked like some kind of plasma containment system. The whole thing was about 12 feet long and maybe 6 feet wide at its widest point, clearly built to accommodate a single occupant in the cockpit that was visible through a curved canopy. "Is that?" Danny started, then stopped, unable to find words. "It's a prototype aircraft," William said quietly. "Based on a propulsion concept I developed late in my career but could never get funding to test. The official projects always went with conventional approaches, but I knew this design had potential. So when I retired, I decided to build it myself, prove the concept worked. I stood up and walked closer, studying the incredible machine. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, every component precisely manufactured and assembled. This must have cost a fortune. The house mortgage paid off, William admitted. Most of my retirement savings, your grandmother's life insurance. I sold off timber rights to part of the back acreage. Over 11 years, it added up to about $230,000 in materials, components, and specialized equipment. "Does it work?" I asked. The engineering was so far beyond anything I understood that I couldn't begin to evaluate whether this was a functional aircraft or an elaborate fantasy. William moved to a computer workstation set up along one wall, covered in monitors and technical readouts. I've run thousands of simulations, tested every component individually and in subsystems. According to every calculation and bench test, yes, it should work. The propulsion system generates thrust through a combination of electromagnetic acceleration and controlled plasma dynamics. It's more efficient than traditional engines and theoretically capable of sustained flight at speeds up to 300 miles per hour. "But you haven't flown it," Danny said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," William admitted, "I haven't flown it. Partly because testing something like this requires permits and clearances I don't have. The FAA would have a field day with an unregistered experimental aircraft using a propulsion system that doesn't fit any existing category. But mostly because I'm 73 years old, and if something goes wrong, there's no ejection seat, no backup systems. It's a one-way trip if the calculations are off. So you built this incredible machine, and it just sits here." I couldn't keep the frustration out of my voice. It seemed like such a waste, all that knowledge and effort and money poured into something that would never fulfill its purpose. William looked at me steadily. "I built it because I needed to prove I could, because the engineering challenge consumed me in a way nothing else did after your grandmother died. Whether it ever flies is almost beside the point. The value was in the creation, in solving thousands of small problems that together added up to something unprecedented. But he paused, and something shifted in his expression. But I'm getting old. My hands aren't as steady as they were, my eyesight isn't as sharp, and I'm increasingly aware that all this knowledge and work will die with me unless I pass it on. That's part of why I wanted you boys here. Not just because you're family, and I owed your mother a debt I can never repay, but because I thought maybe one of you might be interested in understanding this, in learning what I've spent my life learning. Over the following months, the aircraft became the center of our education. William walked us through every system, every design decision, every calculation and compromise. Danny absorbed the technical information like a sponge, filling notebooks with diagrams and equations, asking questions that pushed William to explain concepts in deeper detail. I focused more on the practical aspects, learning how the systems integrated, how to troubleshoot potential failures, how to maintain and test the complex machinery. William had documentation for everything, technical manuals he'd written himself, test logs going back years, simulation results showing how the aircraft should perform under various conditions. As spring arrived and the snow melted, revealing the muddy fields and awakening forest, we'd progressed from students to collaborators. William had us help with modifications and improvements, testing new control algorithms and refining the electromagnetic shielding that protected the pilot from the propulsion system's intense fields. The work was challenging and sometimes frustrating, but it gave all three of us a sense of shared purpose that transformed our relationship from obligatory family connection to genuine partnership. One evening in late April, William made an announcement that shocked both of us. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said, as we sat around the kitchen table after dinner. "I'm not going to live forever, and this farm and everything in it will eventually be yours. But I don't want my life's work to end up as scrap metal in some estate sale because you boys don't know what to do with it." He pulled out a folder of documents and spread them on the table. "I've established a trust that will maintain the farm and provide for both of you through college if you want to go. I've also documented every aspect of the aircraft project, not just the technical details, but the vision behind it. Alternative propulsion systems that don't rely on fossil fuels, designs that could make flight more accessible and efficient, ways of thinking about aerospace engineering that challenge conventional approaches." Danny looked at the documents with wide eyes. "You want us to finish it? To fly it?" William shook his head slowly. "I want you to understand it well enough to make your own decision about what to do with it. Maybe you'll finish it and test it properly. Maybe you'll use the concepts to design something entirely different. Maybe you'll decide the whole thing is a folly and sell it for parts. But whatever you choose, I want it to be an informed choice based on understanding, not ignorance or fear." He looked at me directly. "Your mother thought I was cold and unfeeling because I worked with machines instead of people, but she never understood that building things, solving problems, creating order from chaos, that's how I express love." I couldn't tell her I loved her with words. We were both too stubborn and proud, but I could design systems that worked perfectly, that solved real problems, that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. That was my language of love, and she never learned to read it. I felt something shift inside me, a piece of understanding clicking into place. "You're teaching us that language." "Exactly," William said. "Whether you choose to speak it yourselves is up to you, but at least you'll understand it when you see it in the world. You'll recognize the love that goes into perfectly engineered systems, the care that shows in precise craftsmanship, the dedication that builds something extraordinary from nothing but knowledge and effort." That summer, Danny turned 13 and I turned 17. We'd been on the farm for almost a year, and it had become home in ways I never expected. The fields and forest, the chickens and horses, the workshop and its incredible secret. All of it felt like it belonged to us, and we belonged to it. School friends had become actual friends, and the community had accepted us not as William's charity cases, but as legitimate members of the Brooks family. William's health had started declining noticeably that summer. Nothing dramatic, but he tired more easily, moved more slowly, spent more time resting and less time in the workshop. He'd finally agreed to see a doctor after Danny and I basically forced him, and the news wasn't good. His heart was failing, the result of decades of stress and a lifetime of prioritizing work over health. The doctor gave him medications and restrictions, no heavy lifting, limited physical exertion, careful monitoring of symptoms. William accepted the diagnosis with the same stoic practicality he applied to engineering problems. It was bound to happen eventually, he said, when we pressed him about treatment options. I'm 74 years old. I've had a longer run than I probably deserved, and I've made my peace with mortality. What matters now is making sure you boys are prepared for what comes next. He spent his remaining energy finishing our education, not just in engineering but in life skills, managing finances, maintaining property, dealing with legal and practical matters. He introduced us to his lawyer, his accountant, the neighbors who'd known him for decades. He made sure we understood the farm's operations, the income from timber leases and hay sales, the expenses and maintenance requirements. But mostly, he talked about choices and consequences, about how decisions made in pride or fear could echo through generations, about the importance of recognizing when you're wrong and having the courage to change course. I lost 16 years with your mother because I couldn't admit I was wrong, he told us one evening as we sat on the porch watching fireflies. 16 years I could have known her as an adult. Could have met you boys when you were babies, could have been the grandfather you deserved. Instead, I was stubborn and prideful, and by the time I realized my mistake, it was too late for apologies. Don't make that mistake. When you're wrong, admit it. When you've hurt someone, apologize. When you've built walls out of pride, tear them down before it's too late. William died on a cold morning in November, just after Danny's 14th birthday, and 2 months before I would turn 18. He'd spent the previous evening in the workshop with both of us, going over final details of the aircraft's control systems and making us promise we'd finish our education before making any major decisions about his work. He died peacefully in his sleep, and while we grieved, there was also a sense of rightness to it. He'd accomplished what he'd set out to do, passing on his knowledge and giving us the foundation to build our own lives. The funeral was attended by more people than I expected, neighbors and former colleagues, people whose lives William had touched in quiet ways we'd never known about. They told stories of his generosity, his problem-solving skills applied to community needs, his willingness to help anyone who asked. The cold, mechanical engineer our mother had described was clearly only one facet of a more complex person. Danny and I inherited everything as William had planned: the farm, the workshop, the aircraft, and the responsibility of deciding what to do with it all. I finished high school while Danny continued middle school, and we managed the property with help from neighbors who remembered William fondly. The aircraft remained in its locked room, waiting for us to gain the knowledge and courage to complete what William had started. Now, 3 years later, I'm 20 years old and Danny is 16. We've both excelled in school, pushed by the foundation William gave us and the example he set. I'm studying aerospace engineering at Penn State, coming home on weekends to help Danny maintain the farm. Danny has become something of a prodigy, winning state science competitions with projects based on concepts William taught him, and he's already being recruited by top engineering schools. The aircraft still waits in the basement workshop. We've made improvements and refinements, testing systems more thoroughly and documenting everything with the precision William taught us. Soon, maybe next summer when I've finished more of my coursework and Danny has graduated high school, we'll attempt the first flight. Not because we need to prove anything, but because completing William's work feels like honoring the legacy he left us, the knowledge, the craftsmanship, and the understanding that love can be expressed through the things we build with care and dedication. Thank you so much for staying with Marcus and Danny's story all the way to the end. If this journey from the orphanage to the farm, from loss to belonging, and from secrets to understanding resonated with you, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to this channel. We're building a community here of people who believe that family is complicated, that legacies come in unexpected forms, and that sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones that teach us who we're capable of becoming. I'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever inherited something, maybe not property or machines, but knowledge, skills, or perspectives from someone who shaped who you are? Maybe a grandparent taught you a craft, or a mentor shared wisdom that changed your trajectory, or you discovered something about a family member after they were gone that made you see them and yourself differently. Share your stories with this community. We're all here learning from each other's experiences, and every comment adds to the conversation in meaningful ways. Here's what I'm most curious about. What's the biggest lesson you're taking away from Marcus and Danny's story? Was it about the different ways people express love, about second chances and redemption, about the value of skills and knowledge passed between generations, or maybe something else entirely that spoke to your own experience? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single comment, and your insights often teach me things I hadn't considered about the stories we share here. Thank you for being part of this community, and I'll see you in the next story.